This week we read ALOTECHA, the third Parsha, the third section of the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers. This Parsha begins with the lighting of the menorah, a commandment that was given to Aaron, who was told that it is his responsibility to kindle the menorah, the candelabrum, in the Mishkan, in the sanctuary. And the question is asked, the Gemara, the Talmud, makes it very clear that hadlaka kshera bizar, lighting the menorah, can be done by anyone. You don't have to have a kohen. You have to have a kohen to prepare the wick, to put the oil in, to clean it out, get it ready to facilitate the lighting. But anyone, any Jew who is able to light the menorah, which is not a big deal, is allowed to light the menorah. Hadlaka lav avodahi. It says in the Talmud that lighting the menorah is not considered a real service. It's only an accessory to what is important, that there should be a flame burning. So why does it say that Aaron had to do it? And one of the answers is that, true, you don't need a kohen to light the menorah, but that's only after it was already lit once. It was inaugurated, it was initiated. The initiation process to establish its functionality, to establish its status and its power to accomplish what the menorah is supposed to accomplish, which we'll soon explain. For that you needed someone of the priestly background, and moreover you needed someone like Aaron. He was the one who initiated the whole thing. We find a similar pattern also connected to the menorah. Centuries later, when the miracle of Hanukkah occurred, we know the story behind that is that the Greeks had contaminated all the oil, and they found only one cruse of oil to use for the menorah. The same menorah that was discussed in this week's Parsha, that same menorah, not the exact same piece of gold. Actually, they didn't use gold, they didn't have gold then, but it was a menorah that took the place of this menorah, and they couldn't light it with the contaminated oil. And the miracle had to happen that the oil that they found, one cruse that was enough for one night, lasted for 8. And the question is asked, according to Jewish law, tumah, impurity, hutra b'tzibur, is suspended. The laws that prohibit us from using impure oil is suspended when you're dealing with a communal offering, a communal mitzvah in the temple, such as lighting the menorah. That means if you don't have pure oil, you could use impure oil. So why do they need a miracle? So there are many answers to that question. One answer is that God wanted to show how much He loved the Jewish people, that He wanted them to do it on the highest of levels. But another answer is that, yes, it's true that once you have a menorah, once the menorah has been inaugurated, it has been introduced, initiated into the temple, and it has its kedusha, its holiness intact, then it could tolerate even impure oil. That is also kosher. But when you have to inaugurate and initiate a new menorah, it has to be done in the most perfect, the most pure, the most unadulterated way. When the miracle of Hanukkah occurred, they had to make a new menorah. Their old menorah was no longer there, or was no longer usable for whatever reason. So this new menorah had to be inaugurated. You couldn't use impure oil, because when you start something, the integrity has to be greater than when it's already flowing. It's already part of a process. And the lesson that has been derived from this is the negation of a false belief that children should not be given too much heavy indoctrination when it comes to religion, when it comes to Judaism, when it comes to Torah. When they get older, then you could put in their lap, so to speak, more extreme ideas, such as miracles. Don't trouble their little minds with miracles that they can't understand. And here the lesson is, on the contrary, when you're starting the education of a child, just like when we educate and consecrate and dedicate the Mishkan, the sanctuary, you have to use pure oil, and it has to be done by the most august leader of the Jewish people, the high priest Aaron himself, Similarly, when you start the process of education of a child, when you start any program, you want to start with all the intensity that you could muster, and then you know that what comes later will flow in the right direction. It's, to use an analogy, the boiler room in a big building will have more heat than the rest of the building, because if you want to generate the heat beyond the source, the foundation has to be very hot. Okay, so Aaron was told to light the menorah, and he was told that all the flames, the very first verse, God spoke to Moses saying, "Speak to Aaron and say to him, when you kindle the lamps of the menorah, toward the face of the menorah shall the 7 lamps cast light." That's one of several ways of translating it, but whichever translation you follow, what it means is that all the wicks have to be directed towards the center of the menorah. And then the Torah says, "Vayas Cain Aaron." Aaron did so. Toward the face of the menorah he kindled its lamps, as God had commanded Moses. Excuse me. And Rashi comments on these words, "and Aaron did so." What does that mean? Aaron did so. It says, this is to tell you the praise of Aaron, that he did not alter, he did not deviate from the commandment. And the commentators are puzzled by the words of Rashi, which are based on the words of the Torah, that says that Aaron did as he was told. Would anyone have thought that Aaron would not listen to God's command? We're not talking about doing something that takes tremendous self-sacrifice, and even that he would have done. Aaron was the holiest Jew alive, second only to Moses. And how could we imagine that Aaron would have entertained a thought that would have him not comply with the directives, which are quite clear what they were, to how to light the menorah? Why is the Torah forced to tell us that he didn't alter? And there are many answers to this question. I'd like to share a novel answer. When Aaron heard, as we read last week, that every leader of every tribe would bring a dedicatory offering, that means they initiated and inaugurated the Mishkan, the sanctuary, by a special offering on behalf of their tribe. And each leader of the 12 tribes brought an offering. The tribe of Levi, which was the most important tribe in terms of divine service, and Aaron, its leader, were left out. And Aaron was troubled by that. Chol Shadaito, his mind weakened, is the literal translation of the phrase. That means that Aaron was very disturbed by the fact that he was denied the privilege and the opportunity to dedicate the sanctuary, because neither he or his tribe were part of it. So Rashi continues that therefore God says to Moses to tell Aaron, don't worry, I'm going to give you another responsibility, lighting the menorah, and what you're going to do is even greater and more important than what they're doing. What exactly was Aaron's problem? Why was he so upset that he was left out? After all, Aaron was the one who offered the sacrifices that the leaders of the tribes brought. Aaron was commissioned with so many different services in the temple, so just because he was left out of one, and not even totally left out of it, he was already feeling so disturbed. So one way of understanding this is as follows. There are two kinds of leaders. There are leaders of tribes and leaders of the Jewish people. The leader of a tribe is responsible for his tribe. The leader of the tribe of Reuven, for example, cannot say, you know what, I want to get involved with the tribe of Shimon and try to take care of their needs. Yes, if you finish taking care of all the needs of your tribe and you have some time left over, you could certainly help the leader of the other tribe. You can give him advice. But your primary function, your primary responsibility is your own community. If you're a rabbi in a community, your primary responsibility is to that community, and only as a secondary responsibility could you go beyond your community. And the same thing is true here. That's one kind of leader. They're parochial leaders. They're supposed to be parochial. They're supposed to be focused on their individual tribe. Then you have general leaders. Moses was a leader of all 12 tribes equally. Aaron, too, was responsible for all the tribes. Now, when he lit the menorah consisted of 7 branches, and each branch, we're told, corresponded to a different personality type. So although the tribes are divided into 12, they could also be divided into 7 personality types, because some tribes could have overlapping traits. And by Aaron lighting the menorah, he was kindling, he was igniting the souls of all the different personality types. Well, when Aaron was lighting the menorah, he was supposed to focus on the entire Jewish community. The menorah was one piece. It wasn't 7 separate branches. They were separate, but they were all made of one piece of gold. So Aaron's focus was not on any individual tribe, certainly not on his own tribe. It was on the totality of the Jewish people. And that's symbolized by the flames pointing towards the center. This was a unified focus where he was going to bring light to the Jewish people in their entirety, which would then flow down to the 7 different personality types. Now, Aaron might have thought to himself, you know what? I was denied to bring a special offering on behalf of my tribe. My parochial interests were ignored. I didn't have the opportunity to bring a special offering for my tribe. And the reason for that is because Levi, the tribe of Levi, and Aaron, their specific and parochial responsibility is the entirety of the Jewish people. So Aaron might have harbored a extraneous thought that while he's bringing his offering, which is the lighting of the menorah, he will think not about the Jewish people as a whole, but he'll think about his tribe in particular, so he could gain something from this spiritual experience for himself and for his tribe. And the Torah says, no, Aaron did exactly as he was told. He did exactly as he was told. He did not change anything. He did not change even in his mind to harbor a thought that was not in total conformity with God's will. That's one possible way of explaining the reason why we have to be told that Aaron did not change. One more explanation. It says, Vayas Cain Aaron. Aaron did so. Where do we find the word Cain? In the beginning of the Torah, when God creates the world, the universe, after every day of creation, with the exception of the day 1, it tells us what God created that day, and it says, Vayehi Cain. God said, let there be this or that, and Vayehi Cain, and so it was. On the first day of creation, however, when God said, let there be light, it doesn't say Vayehi Cain, and it was so. It says Vayehi Ar. Yehi Ar, let there be light. Vayehi Ar, and there was light. Why doesn't it use the word Vayehi Cain, and so it was? So the mystics explain that it wasn't so. When God created light, the light that he said he wanted was a different kind of light. It was not sunlight. Sunlight only came about on the 4th day of creation. It was a spiritual light that enabled a person to physically see from one end of the world to the other, because it was a light that reflected God's divine energy, that enabled people to see things not just physically but also spiritually. What happened to this light? God did not want this light to be exposed to people who might be evil. They can use this light the wrong way, so he hid the light, he concealed it. Where did he conceal it? He concealed it in the Torah. If you probe beneath the surface of the Torah, you could find glimmer of that light. Where else do we find that light? It says that light will be revealed in the future Messianic age in its full glory. But where today have we had the experience of that light? Well, one place is in the Beis Hamikdash, in the Holy Temple, when Aaron lit the menorah. When Aaron lit the menorah, Vayehi Cain, or Vayas Cain, and he did so. That means when he lit the menorah, the light that God wanted was actually generated into the world. And that great power was later on preserved on Hanukkah. On Hanukkah, when we light the menorah, we are recreating or regenerating the light that was created on day 1, which is a portent, a preparation for the light that we will be exposed to in the Messianic age. Later on in the Parsha, we read of how all of the tribes were configured. There were 4 different groupings, each one of 3 tribes. They surrounded the Mishkan, the sanctuary, and there was a process, there was a whole procedure how they would travel. And here's a commandment that God gives Moses. This is in chapter 10, the beginning of chapter 10. God speaks to Moses, saying, he spoke to Moses, saying, make for yourself 2 silver trumpets. And what are the trumpets for? This is a way of gathering the people to start to travel. When they sound a long blast with them, the entire assembly shall assemble to you to the entrance of the tent of meeting. So we start off by the commandment to create these trumpets, and when there is a tekiah is a long blast, that's how the leader gathers the people. Now, the shofar has several sounds. On Rosh Hashanah, we have 3 different kinds of sounds. We have tekiah, a long blast. We have shvarim, a broken blast, 2, 2, 2. And then we have trua, a staccato, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. And here, the emphasis was that it should be tekiah, it should be a straightforward blast, no broken blasts. Rabbi Meir of Primishlan, the great Hasidic master, explained that what this is trying to tell us, that when a leader gathers the people, it means when he's engaged in leadership, in bringing the people together, his message has to be a straightforward message. The message cannot be a truncated one, a broken one, a message that doesn't feel consistent. When the leader is inconsistent, when the leader has a broken message, he cannot create a harmonious unification of all the people to follow in his direction. The direction he has to give has to be consistent, and it can't be broken up. It has to constantly flow with one message, one overarching message. Of course, in our own generation, we have the Rabbi, who from the very beginning of his leadership, he never stopped emphasizing that the role of our generation, which is the 7th generation from the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, was parallel to the 7 generations from Abraham to Moses, which brought the divine presence into the world. And that too is our goal, to bring the divine presence in the most revealed way, even down into the streets, as the Rebbe would advocate the putting on tefillin in public places, in airports, as well as all other places, to bring God, Torah, into the very lowest aspects of the physical world, the lowest and lowliest, because that is the purpose of creation, to give God a dwelling place in this physical world, at which time, when we do our part in making that reality, that will bring the messianic age where God's presence will be permeating throughout the entire world. That was the one message. The Rebbe spoke thousands and thousands of hours of talk on thousands of subjects, but there was always that one unifying theme. It was a tekiah, it was a straightforward tekiah that unifies the whole world, knowing that what its mission is to prepare ourselves for the Messianic age. After this, we read about how the Jews complained. No one should be shocked that Jews complained, but there are 2 kinds of complaints. Aaron complained also that he was not part of the dedication of the sanctuary. That was a good complaint. God gave him a consolation prize that he would light the menorah. The Jews, we just read also, we actually didn't read it now, but it's in the Parsha a little bit earlier, where the Jews complained that they couldn't bring the Korban Pesach, the Paschal offering, because they were tamei, they had become ritually defiled, they came in contact with dead bodies, and therefore they were precluded from bringing the Paschal offering on the first anniversary of Pesach. They felt terrible, and they complained to Moses, Lama nigara, why should we be diminished? And Moses said he doesn't have an answer, he'd have to ask God, and God says they're right, and they will get another opportunity a month later, teaching us a very powerful lesson that it's never too late. But there's a preliminary lesson that God loves when we complain about why we can't have more opportunities to serve him, to connect to him. It's music to God's ears when we make that complaint. As long as we're prepared to hear the answer, whether it's yes or no, we have a right to say to God, God, why are you putting us in a position where we can't do the mitzvahs properly? And that's the exact underlying reason and rationale for all of our prayers, where we not just politely suggest to God that it might be a good idea to bring the redemption, but we say it forcefully. And as the Midrash tells us, that the Amidah that we say every day, 3 times a day, in which we ask for the restoration of the temple and of the Davidic dynasty and the Messianic age in general, we don't just ask, but we demand it. God wants us to demand it because he wants us to show that we really want this very special relationship with him that came through the temple and will be fully revealed in the Messianic age. So people complaining about things like that is fine. It's when they start complaining about they don't have meat, and they were complaining about the manna from heaven, and they were saying that we remember the good old days in Egypt when we were able to eat the fish gratis. We didn't have to pay for anything. You didn't have to pay? What do you mean? You were tortured. You were oppressed. They beat you mercilessly. They almost killed so many of the slaves, and some of them were killed. They took your babies and crushed them into the mortar. That's called free? What do they really mean by this? So one explanation is, a very down-to-earth explanation, that when a person has food for the next day, they feel secure, even today, because they know they have enough for them tomorrow as well, and the day after. But when you're depending on food from heaven, which is not exactly a natural phenomenon, it's something that has to come miraculously. Miracles don't happen every day. You don't rely on miracles as a principle of Judaism. And the first day they had it, it was great, it was exciting. The second day, but after a while, they were always concerned maybe it won't be around for the next day. So that's why they reminisced and they waxed nostalgic about the good old days in Egypt, which also points to the fact how fast people forget their troubles of the past when they no longer have to experience them, and somehow they can even think back and in a favorable way about their past. We find that tragically even true today. Some Jews who have left the Soviet Union, where their lives were miserable, but because of things that they don't like about life in America or life in Israel, and they complain about it, they'll say, well, in Russia we had it better. No, you didn't have it better there, but you want to convince yourself that you had it better. That's a simple down-to-earth explanation, but there's a spiritual explanation that says that they didn't mean free, that they didn't have to suffer, they weren't beaten for it. I guess if they didn't do their work, they wouldn't get their food either. But they didn't have to do mitzvahs. Now you'd say, well, they had to do work, they were slave laborers. There's a very big difference. There's a principle in Judaism that when God tells you to do something, there's a built-in resistance to it. That's why the Talmud says that the person who is commanded to do a mitzvah is greater when he does the mitzvah than the one who does it voluntarily. Because when you do it voluntarily, you don't have the same resistance, because it's not something that is so important. It's not compulsory. And because of that, the Yetzer Hara, the evil impulse, doesn't set itself up as your adversary to prevent you from doing it. But when it's a commandment, which means more than just a commandment, the word mitzvah, we said many times, means connection. It's that which will connect you to God. The forces of negativity put up their greatest resistance to get you not to do the mitzvah. And as a result, when you do the mitzvah, you accomplish a lot more than if you had done it just voluntarily. So in Egypt, they had no mitzvahs. There was no connection to God by work and by slave labor. And therefore, they didn't have a sense that their food was somehow connected to their following God's command. And therefore they said, we had a good time there. We didn't have to do mitzvahs. Now we have to do mitzvahs and we're meeting all this resistance. Later on, we read how, because of the complaints, they wanted meat. Moses says, I can't handle this anymore, so God says that he should delegate his power to 70 elders. And 70 people were chosen, and they were the ones through whom Moses' spiritual energy was channeled to allow the emergence of this slove, the quails that came into the camp, and the Jews had ample meat. Then the Torah tells us there were two people. This is in chapter 11, verse 26. There were two people remained behind in the camp. They were not part of the 70. One was called Eldad, the other one was Medad, and the Spirit rested upon them. They actually became prophets. And the youth ran and told Moses, and he said, the youth said, Moses, Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. And Joshua, the servant of Moses, spoke up and said, my Lord, Moses, incarcerate them. He was very upset that they were saying prophecies. And Moses said to him, are you being zealous for my sake? Would that the entire people of God could be prophets, if a God would but place his Spirit upon them. This was Moses' noble character. He didn't mind the competition, on the contrary, but there's more than that. Rashi explains that what were Eldad and Medad prophesying, that Moses will die and Joshua will bring the Jews into Israel. And Joshua couldn't handle that. Even though they were predicting that he would be the leader, that's the last thing that he wanted. A true disciple, a true child, the last thing they would want is to succeed their father, their teacher. Now, there's a very cute interpretation given by the Gaon of Vilna, who says the following. It says in the Talmud, Milah, that if you have a word, you just say one word instead of saying a lot of words. Besela, it's worth a sela. A sela is like $1. Shtikusa, if you're silent, betray, it's worth $2. So that's a simple teaching telling us that brevity is important, silence is even more important. The Gaon of Vilna said the following ingenious explanation. Why is it that Moses did not lead the Jews into Israel? Because, as we'll read later on, God told him to speak to the rock, the Selah, that it would produce water. And he spoke to it. It didn't work at first, so he took his staff and he struck the rock. And God says, because you didn't sanctify me, because you struck the rock, that's how Rashi explains it, you will not go into the promised land. So this is how the Gaon of Vilna explains that phrase. Milah, a word, Besela, if you would have only said the word when you struck the Selah. Selah has a double meaning. It means it's a coin, $1, and it also means a rock. If you had only spoken to the rock, then two people, Eldad and Medad, would have been silent. They couldn't have said their prophecy that you will die and Joshua will take the Jews into the land of Israel. Then we have, at the end of the Parsha, the most cryptic story in the entire 5 books of Moses. Arguably, the most cryptic. What is the story over here? Miriam and Aaron spoke about Moses. They spoke about the Cushite woman he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. And they said, was it only to Moses that God spoke? Did he not speak to us as well? What does that have to do with his marrying of a Cushite woman? And God heard. And then it says, now, Moses, the man Moses, was exceedingly humble, more than any person on the face of the earth. How does that relate to what they were saying? They said something about his wife. What does it have to do with his humility? And God said suddenly to Moses, to Aaron, and to Miriam, go out of the tent. And they left. And God summoned Aaron and Miriam. go out, and he tells them about how great Moses was. Hear now my words. If there shall be prophets among you, in a vision shall I, God, make myself known to him. In a dream shall I speak with him. Not so as my servant Moses. In my entire house he is the trusted one. Mouth to mouth do I speak to him in a clear vision and not in riddles. At the image of God does he gaze. Why did you not fear to speak against my servant Moses? And as a result, Miriam became leprous, and the people had to wait a week until she was healed. What exactly were they saying that was disparaging about Moses, for which they were punished? Or at least Miriam was punished. And Rashi explains the following. The wife that Moses took was Tzipporah, as we read earlier. Why is she called a Cushite woman? Because Cush is Ethiopia, where the people were very, very dark-skinned. And she was as beautiful as they are dark-skinned. In other words, it's a way of describing someone's beauty by saying how black they are, really meaning how beautiful they are. At any rate, whatever the reason is, they were talking about his wife Tzipporah. And what were they talking about her? Well, this is the background to the story. If you just remember what we read, that there were prophets, Eldad and Medad, prophesying, and everyone heard about it apparently. And Tzipporah remarked to Miriam, I pity their wives. Why? Miriam asked her. Because she said, my husband Moses is separated from me because he's a prophet. And he was no longer engaged in marital intimacy. And Miriam said, that's not right. I'm also a prophet. My brother Aaron is a prophet, and we are married. And implying that Moses was somewhat presumptuous to think that he's a greater prophet, or that he had special reasons to behave that way. And that's what they were upset about. That's what Miriam was upset about. Well, there was truth to that statement of Tzipporah, but it was not true that a prophet has to be celibate. In Judaism, there is no such thing as a person required to be celibate. In fact, the high priest on Yom Kippur had to be married, otherwise he was disqualified to do the service. What was the problem when God told Moses to get the people ready for Mount Sinai? They were told for 3 days before that event that they were to be separated from their wives. It was a purification process. After the Sinai experience was over, after the Torah was given, God said to Moses, tell the people, go back to their tents. That was a euphemism saying, go back to normal marital life. But then God says, but you stay with me. As a way of saying, you, Moses, you're on call 24/7. You have to be ready to speak to me, so you cannot go back to your wife. That was exclusive for Moses. But Miriam didn't know that, and therefore she said, I don't understand my brother Moses. Why is he separated from his wife? And as a result, God says, you can't compare yourselves to Moses. Moses is someone who I speak to mouth, or face to face, as it says in another place. And I don't speak to him at night when he's asleep, in a dream, in a trance. I'm there for him all the time. And therefore, he's different. You shouldn't have spoken ill of Moses. That's one interpretation. Another interpretation is the very opposite, given by the Tosfos commentary, that they were upset that Moses married Tzipporah because she was not from the Jewish community. She was a Midianite daughter. Her father was a high priest of Midian who was a pagan priest. And they felt that Moses, who's now the leader of the Jewish people, through whom the Jews were liberated, through whom the Torah was given, the one through whom the Mishkan, the tabernacle, the sanctuary was erected, that he should be married to someone of a more distinguished lineage, someone from his own tribe perhaps, not a Midianite woman, although Midian was a descendant of Abraham, but that was not part of the Jewish people. And of course, Tzipporah, the Torah was given, every Jew became a convert to Judaism, so did Tzipporah. But they still felt that it was not the same lineage that was becoming of Moses. Miriam married Kalev. He was a leader of the tribe of Yehuda, a distinguished tribe. Aaron married the sister of Nachshon, a leader of the tribe of Yehuda as well. So they all married into aristocracy. And Moses here has a Midianite. So they were upset about that, and they spoke disparagingly about that relationship. And what does God say about Moses? In all my house he is faithful. That Moses is faithful to his wife, that lived with him and stuck with him, joined him in the desert, and he was not going to abandon her. That's the greatness of Moses. Moses was a humble person. He wasn't looking for royalty, for aristocracy, to marrying into yichus, as they say, to great pedigree. He was content, and to him she was the greatest person alive, and there's no one else, especially after she saved his life on the way to Egypt. It's a whole story that we read earlier in the beginning of the book of Exodus. And that's why Moses was held in such high esteem, because of his humility. Just to conclude on how Moses was able to be so humble, knowing how great he was, how brilliant he was, how close to God he was, how he was unique even amongst great prophets, including his own brother and sister. And the answer was given once by the Alter Rebbe, who said that, according to the Talmud, Moses was given a view of all future generations of the Jewish people. When he came to the final period of Jewish history, before the Messianic age, and he saw the way Jews will be persecuted, oppressed, threatened, enticed, challenged in ways that are unprecedented, and that they come out of this unscathed. They are still faithful and loyal to God. They are Neman, they are faithful, just like he is faithful, but they are faithful under the most trying of conditions. That's what humbled Moses, and that's what made him realize how great everyone else is, how great the Jewish people are, that even the simple Jews, and certainly relative to Moses, we are all simple, we are the ones who will bring the Mashiach, bring the redemption, because we have been challenged in ways that are unparalleled, unprecedented, and we have passed this test with flying colors. Have a good evening and a good Shabbos and a good week.